I expressed my dismay in Sunday school this morning, though, Jan, that I didn't think that you'd followed the theme of the morning. I expected the choir to lead us off with, Jeremiah was a bullfrog, was a good friend of mine. I never understood a single thing he said, but I helped him drink his wine. That's good. That's good. See there?
Sorry.
One of the few prophets that you can remember a song like that by. Can't think of, well, wasn't there an Amos the alligator? But we'll let that go. So we proceed. We've got two prophets left. We began with Elijah. I walk these off every week to kind of remind us the journey, the different personalities and context. The great prophet Elijah, who stood and challenged the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, demonstrating for the people of Israel that no matter what Ahab and Jezebel, the rulers, were saying, that religious syncretism was not okay, that God, who had brought the people out of Egypt's bondage, was still God to be honored and to be followed. Young Amos came along from the backcountry of Tekoa, uncredentialed, and he would come into town and he would see things that just bothered him to the core of his soul. He saw the thumbs being pressed down on the scales in the marketplace to benefit the few. He saw the rich basking with plenty while the poor had very little. And Amos said to the people in that northern kingdom, Israel, things cannot stand. God will not tolerate this. And so I said that years later, after the Assyrians had captured 722, 723 BCE, had captured that northern kingdom, that people began remembering Amos's words. And the whole weight of those crashed down. And then we came to the loving prophet Hosea, who saw that God's love was Israel in spite of Israel's sin, that God's love was so great that God would never walk away even if they were unfaithful, that God's steadfast mercy abided forever. And he saw that in his relationship with Gomer, who had been unfaithful to him as a spouse and had ended up selling herself into prostitution. And as that love rang true for him, the person telling the story said that Hosea took the shekels and the barley and the wine and went and bought Gomer out of bondage, because the writer wants us to know that's how God is in terms of God's steadfast love. Last week it was the aristocrat, Isaiah, who after Uzziah died had this vision that people took God too lightly, that people had lost this vision of this God of the cosmos with incredible power, whose work could be seen throughout the heavens. And he saw that vision, and when he received the call, he responded with, "Here I am, send me." He was a prophet of privilege. He was in the court advising 4 different kings, and that's why it's interesting that we have to bring Jeremiah here into this place today. Because Jeremiah was almost the opposite of Isaiah. Jeremiah was a person who operated with a great sense of pain. And while we have no caseworker working up a case study on Jeremiah, we can get from the story how hard life was. He could soar to incredible heights, and he could just fall to the lowest depths. Jeremiah struggled all of his life, and he heard a call early in life to go and speak truth. And what did he say? I'm too young. I can't do that. That's not my gift. It's what people have been saying in church forever. Oh, I can't be on that committee. That's just not my gift. Now, it never occurs to them that if they were at workplace and said that to the boss, it wouldn't work out so well. But we heard that remember when Moses encountered the burning bush, what did he say? I can't do that. Stuttering Moses, and God said, you can. I'll even give you a crutch. God doesn't even give Jeremiah a crutch. He said, you go and you do this work because I have called you from beginning. Before you even were, I have called you, because there is a call for a person in this place and time, and Jeremiah, it happens to be you. And if Jeremiah had known what was coming, he probably would have said, no thanks, I'll pass. But fortunately, Jeremiah stood and took hold of the call, and it cost him so dearly. He had a self-identity that was scarred. You know, you could see that even as we scrutinize his behavior through modern psychology. And you say, well, how did you know that? Well, I have some inkling that he probably was pretty wounded, because after all, as we read the story, at one point, his family enters into collusion to have him assassinated. That's probably an indication that he didn't get a nurturing childhood. You know, when your family kind of like takes a contract out on you, you probably know that you're not valued, and he didn't grow up with I'm okay, you're okay in his household, right? Because he was a pain. He was a truth teller. We don't know why he was so scarred, why the swings were so significant. We do know that he had never been really blessed by those parents. And at one point, he just almost couldn't face life as it was. The pain. There's almost more lamentations and psalms in Jeremiah than the laments in the Psalms. It is a painful book in places. Leonard asked me a couple weeks ago if Hosea was my favorite, the lover of God, because he sensed my passion. And I said, no, I love Hosea, but my favorite is Jeremiah because he was a whiner. I relate to that. Okay? Jeremiah's sick view of himself was challenged by God, who said, you can. By grace, you can do this. You can be this person that's needed in this time and place. And Jeremiah saw in the southern nation, remember I said weeks ago, you always have to remember when we're talking about the people of Israel, the north seceded from the south. The northern tribes were loyal to King Saul. They never forgot all of David's shenanigans, who came from the tribe down south. But Judah, the nation down south, continued to survive even after Israel up north had fallen. So it was to these people that Jeremiah was called to be a truth teller, if you will. So even in his brokenness, it was amazing. Also, not only was he broken in terms of the family he was born into, but he was born into a nation that was sick and decaying and dying. The words were already written on the wall, so to speak. The judgment was built in. The Babylonians were acquiring power. They were coming, and no alliances that could be made could push back the Babylonians. So this was the time, and this was the place, and these were the people that Isaiah was asked to speak to. They also, by the way, not only were sick, but they were in denial that they were sick. I know you never met anybody like that, or that's never been you. But sometimes in our most broken places, we can't see in ourselves what is obvious to everybody else, because we just won't see, we won't accept that we need help and that we need support and that we need healing. That was the nation of Judah. Injustices were commonplace in the courts. Injustices were commonplace in the marketplace. But they were sure that God would show up when needed. They were sure that God would be with them, and those big bad Babylonians could really never take them on. They were sure, in other words, they were presuming that God would be with them in the way that they wanted God to be with them. So Jeremiah told them the truth, and they abused him, and they humiliated him, and they locked him in prison more than once. Life was really miserable. He was almost assassinated. There was the ebb and flow of the suffering he went through. So he was called, even as a broken person, to minister in this situation. But here's what happens, by the way. And so this is where I want to get to. Because sometimes, in the midst of the despair that we experience, sometimes when we feel our most inadequate, sometimes the holy, the mysterious presence beyond us, known by some during Israel's days as wisdom, that mysterious presence has a way of getting from us what is most needed for the day and giving inspiration so that we have this incredible revelation. And so here's what Jeremiah gave to the people if they'd have been ready. This is what Jeremiah still gives to us if we'll be ready, okay? One image is that Jeremiah goes down at one point to the potter. Remember, I had to work that into the call to worship. We're going to work that into the final hymn because we're singing an old hymn that just appealed to me about this. He goes down to the potter and he's watching the potter work over and over again this clay. And when the potter thinks it's getting right and then it's not right and the potter starts working it all over again because the clay is staying pliable, and the potter keeps working until the pot is just absolutely perfect, both in terms of use and no doubt in terms of its aesthetics. And Jeremiah sees in the work of the prophet, or the potter, this artisan sees this incredible vision of how God is. That God is the great potter. That God is always shaping the clay, always shaping us, always working with us, never giving up on us. Some of us, well, we tend to be a little more lumpy than others. But God keeps working. And Jeremiah said this is the way God was with the people of Judah. That yes, they had sinned, they had failed, they had gone astray, they had made horrible decisions, but God would continue to work with the people because God was the potter who would not quit on the pot. He lived through a horrible time. On the other side of history, we know that eventually those who had been taken away, the leaders who had been carried away into Babylon, who could not sing the Lord's song in a strange land, they were able to return once the Babylonians fell, to rebuild. No one knew that was going to happen. No one could see that in the future. But somehow Jeremiah had that vision that the potter would not quit, would continue to shape the people. The second thing amazes me even more. I can't even fathom this. The city's fallen, he's in jail, everything's gone to, and he's down there. And so what does he do? Because the Babylonians are there, it's happening. He calls for somebody to come. Takes probably all that he has, which couldn't have been too much. The real estate market, I'm sure, at that point wasn't very good. But he sends this person with these assets. out to buy a piece of property. Now, if there was this major category hurricane coming up the coast, and you could see it coming, and it was wiping out everything everywhere and leaving nothing, you'd think somebody was pretty nuts to go out and start buying up property. Jeremiah, in spite of the Babylonians being in control, the nation about to fall, he bought that property because Jeremiah wanted to say to the people, you see, there will be a time, there will come a time when Judah will be restored. There will come a time when God will continue to work with these people and we will come out on the other side. What a great vision that is. What a great example that is. I get so down some days, I'm not even sure that I could imagine doing something so bold and so dramatic. But Jeremiah had that capacity, able to do that. And finally, he puts forth a vision of a new covenant. Behold, the days are coming when I will make a new covenant. To do what? To write my laws on their hearts. And humans will finally understand God's purposes. Now, in case you're wondering, those of you who just can't labor and work your way through the Hebrew Scriptures, the laws that Jeremiah is talking about are not 10 rules that put up on some courthouse in Alabama. That's not the law. That's a simple code that was stolen from the Hammurabi Code so that a nation state could be formed and people could just keep from killing each other long enough to cultivate their fields. No. When God writes the law upon their hearts, it is what we find coming out even in the teachings of Rabbi Jesus, that you will love the Lord your God. Love with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with everything that's within you. And Jesus comes out the other side and says, no, by the way, your neighbor, no matter what he or she looks like, by the way, your neighbor is yourself. Jeremiah says that God's striking a new covenant. And the law will be written not on stone and not on papyrus, but the law will be written within. They will know who they are, whose they are, and what they're to do. It's astounding. I long for God to write that over and over again, because some days it seems to get a little obscure within me. I long for that to be so internalized that every day in every way I can see every person as someone worthy of God's love and thus my love. In the book, what is it? To Greco. What is that? Report to Greco? Yeah, Report to Greco. Sometimes there's a great scene where the old monk encounters a young man and he says, so, the old monk's getting old, and he says, so, are you still wrestling with the devil? This is going to be my words, not Kazantzakis' words. It's okay. And he said, no, I'm much too tired and I'm much too old to wrestle with the devil. He says, these days I wrestle with God. The response is, well, do you hope to win? And the old monk looks at him and says, no, I hope to lose. And I read Jeremiah, and I get to that third piece, that covenant. I don't have any desire to wrestle with some devil. I have too much trouble on days wrestling with God, and I pray that someday I will truly lose. Jeremiah, so broken, so up and down, such a roller coaster ride. In the hardest of times, Jeremiah, through all of his suffering, sees something that no one else seems to be able to see. God is the great potter. Judah will be restored on the other side, even if they can't see it now. The law of God will be written on their hearts. You know, when I came here, I just wasn't so sure. My first few weeks here, I wasn't so sure. I kind of thought, it's like when I used to have to go out with my dad to raid the honeybees. Dave's an expert, it doesn't bother him, but it scared the stuff out of me. I have to get all covered up. I hated those honeybees. Dad never got stung, always seemed to. Those were so hard days. I thought I had stepped into this massive hive of bees. No offense to you. My wife can tell you my perceptions are often wrong. But as the days go by, I perhaps see in you, more than anything, Jeremiah's hope. The Babylonians, for some of you who were here during some hard times, some of you struggled. I know that. You talk too much like me. And yet you persevered. You were stalwarts of this community. You lived through the hard times with no promise that there would be another side. And I read this and I see clearly that constantly God is making us, working us like a potter. Fortunately, God has better material with you than God seems to have with me some days. And I see more than ever that love is written on your hearts. It just is. And so today I'm standing here as your pastor thanking God that I don't have to be much of a Jeremiah here. I simply have to learn to be part of the clay, the same kind of stuff that you're made out of. And every day allow the love of God to try to be projected to you. May God help me and you every day, to hear those words and give thanks to God.